Welcome to Lucid Horizon. This is the third episode of my conversation with Professor Hassan Mansour about economic development and economic growth. In this episode, we are slightly digressing from the actual theme of the conversation because of what happened in last week during a summit between Iranian foreign minister and the Chinese foreign minister. We observed the signing of a huge economic deal between Islamic Republic of Iran and China. Also last week, something else happened, and that was a high-level meeting between U.S. Foreign Minister and Secretary of State and the National Security Advisor and their Chinese counterpart about U.S.-China relationship. Those who watched this conversation between these high-level officials, they saw that the theme was not very friendly. So it seems that the economic decoupling between the United States and China that started during Obama administration and intensified during Trump's is still ongoing, and Biden administration basically and actually continuing the policy on the same pace as Trump was. So my question to you, Professor Mansour, is the following. If we assume that economic decoupling between the United States and China eventually results in the total decoupling and a hostile relationship between the two countries and a bipolar world develops, what would China's economic policy would be to continue their economic growth at the rate we've seen in the last 40 years?
Well, thank you very much again for inviting me to this program, Professor Kangarloo. Well, the relations of China and the US is a very colossal and complicated issue. And of course, decoupling is going to harm the Chinese growth. But China doesn't have all his eggs in one basket. China is, in relation to a great many countries, and has a very meticulous plan for its growth and development. With all problems and, of course, blockages on the road. You refer to this one way, one road project, which is a very very huge project and very difficult to evaluate. I wonder if there is from Chinese point of view, a meticulous, careful project evaluation, because great many elements which exist in this project are very hard to evaluate. About 130 and odd countries are to be involved. Already about 70 countries are involved in it. Great many infrastructural projects in different areas, which means in different jurisdictions legally. So these questions have got really to be understood in each case. For example, to have an arbiter in case a difference in execution of the project arises. Who is the arbiter? Which jurisdiction is going to prevail? So in each case, these are got to be defined. But to put the story in a nutshell, to make it concise and understandable, China is a growing economy with a huge size. So its main problems are, to begin with, to provide employment to its very large population. This is a problem for all countries, problem of employment. But China also, in its turn, has planned it on an international level to have an international division of labor in order to reap the comparative advantages. So for a long time, Chinese labor used to be cheap labor. So outsourcing from European and American companies did happen. Now, compared to other countries, labor in China is becoming more expensive than, for example, Bangladesh. So China does the same thing. It means outsourcing and providing jobs for its own people in those countries, which are cheaper. So one element is provide employment from point of view of China, for its huge population. Second problem which China has been struggling with was to replace this trade surplus, which is enjoyed for a long time. Instead of that, to try to create internal market where it can sell its own goods, part of its own goods internally, not to be in need of foreign markets. This requires elevation of people's income in the country. This has not happened in the scale that China needs. So what to do with this? China has devised export of capital as another alternative. So this extra capital is going to be exported to countries where it can bring and create profit. So employment question, and later on export of labor, because in all these areas, so far as possible, China gives priority in these contracts with these different countries for its own labor force, for its own experts and technicians and own companies. So this means the money which is being loaned out is being reaped back to China. And the third economic element in it is to try and establish Chinese monetary unit in a bigger zone. This has a meaning when you compare it to the Bretton Woods Agreement, which made dollar and pound. In practice, it was dollar, which became the universal means of exchange and settlement. Even now, about 60% of the world reserves are in dollars. About 55-60% of world trade settlements, commodity settlements, are made through dollar. China has the ambition of replacing this money in a smaller scale. So now about 4 or 5 countries accept yuan as a means of exchange. But China means to expand it and make it a kind of a rival to dollar. This is why in any agreement it gets into different countries, one of the elements is you will try to promote yuan. Not in your own country, but in the third countries. In other countries, you collaborate with us in order to promote yuan. This is a first and important step to establish the yuan zone as an alternative to dollar zone. Then you have minor questions like profitability of these projects and taxes. Do Chinese companies pay taxes for the profits they reap from these projects? And these are the areas in which we've had differences in different countries. But anyway, this is the main economic incentive of China. Apart from it, there is an argument that, well, there are also political games. So I may mention some of them, but I will not speculate on those. But so far as I'm concerned, dealing with Chinese economy, that these are main things that China is trying to address. All right. So the first question is, excuse me, you may go ahead. I was going to mention that the question of evaluation of this project is one thing which occupies my mind. Has it been really evaluated? Great many risks. Second question, risk assessment. China does not have a very good reputation in risk assessment. This means that they make an assessment and provide a loan. Later on, the loan is not repaid in the right time. Then what happens? Collaterals. But because they know that evaluation for different and complicated reasons may not be correct, and the loan may not already, you see, a debt-laden country may not be able to pay back, then they take strong collaterals in their natural resources, even natural habitat, as a collateral. So in case they cannot repay, they will confiscate them for 99 years. The project, the happening, which has happened in a few countries so far. So these are the problems. Now, coming it to, in the case of, this is from the point of view of China. But it has been applied already, as mentioned, in many tens of countries. Some of them have already run into problem, and this has made them suspicious about the aims, the policy aims of China. There are already people who have talked about debt trap of China. It means to provide loans which are not going to be repaid and later on to take control. This has happened in certain areas. Some countries, at least 4 or 5 countries, like Zambia, like Djibouti, Congo, Sri Lanka, and Montenegro. Some other countries have been worried about it, Eastern Asian countries. And some countries are less worried, even if they do have problems like Malaysia. There are sovereignty questions arise, for example, in South China Sea. They have differences in who is sovereign, who owns this area. And this is about 5, 6 countries have this problem with China. And all of them coupled with economic and political and military leverage, which is preponderant in China's side. It makes the partners afraid of China's intention. But now, this is from China's point of view. Once it comes to a country like Iran, of course, Iran has its own incentives and motivations.
Very well. So the proponents of this deal state that that China is proposing to invest $400 billion in energy infrastructure, telecommunication, tech sector, and arms sales. We know that China is trying to, like you said, they're trying to do the same thing everywhere. You know, last month we heard that Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, was talking about attracting Chinese investment in France. So, and we've seen that Europeans are also competing with each other to try to attract the Chinese investment. And in the light of all of that, when the whole world is thirsty for the Chinese investment, you see some disadvantages in this particular Chinese investment, at least the promise of $400 billion of investment in the next 25 years, because of certain aspect and behavior of the Islamic Republic. And could you please elaborate on that? Why is that the nature of the Islamic Republic and the intentions, at least as far as your suspicions and the opposition suspicion is concerned, why the intention and the behavior and policies of the Iranian government makes this deal such a disfavored deal against the Iranians' national interest?
Well, the question is whether it is disfavored. We've got to really evaluate. It is understandable there's a great deal of suspicion, but are they really based on evaluation or not? Maybe not. To mention something about investment. Well, investment is a two-party game. The one investor, the where, and people who accept investment. Well, it has an aim to be profitable, and it is not only profit in monetary terms. China has a strategy, and that's good for China. It means to transfer the technology, managerial technology, and techniques. So when it invites European or American companies, it makes it necessary for them to accept the Chinese workforce, work with them, and learn what they do. So they adapt and transfer the technology. So this is a strategic aim from China, and from national point of view, that's good. Nothing's wrong with that. When it happens with a European country has the necessary infrastructure, financially, technically, and legally, so they can deal with it. Project management is a complicated science, but they do have experts. So they are not going to necessarily end up losers. But when it comes to Iran, well, Iran has certain disadvantages from the point of view of Iranian nation. One, for Iran, hopping into this agreement with China is not a choice. Choice there is when you have different options. When you have access to America, to Europe, to Japan, to Australia, to all the free world and advanced world, then you compare the advantages and decide to make the deal with China. That's fine. But in the absence of all other options, then this means this is a must. This is a necessity for Iran. Second, Iran has, as an entity, and you see that once you get the analytics of certain people who, with very good intentions, make some very superficial and silly mistakes. Because everybody has relations with every other nation, so why not Iran? That's fine. Iran has also a right to have relations and good relations with China, with Russia, with any other country. But Iran doesn't have these relations. So Iran is forced into the arms of Russia and China. Second, there's the question of the experience we've already had historically. There are examples when Chinese have entered into a big project, but they have withdrawn and left it incomplete. They have almost confiscated the rights of the people who were executing that project before, without paying back. So these kind of relations are quite vivid and alive in the memory of Iranian managers and investors. But let's turn to Iranian side. In Iranian side, there are things which make it suspicious. That's a question of trust. Why do Iranians get excited when they hear about it and they become very anxious? Because they have the background that Islamic Republic has made already a sellout in Caspian Sea. When the Russian side says we were prepared in our negotiation table, we were prepared to accept 50% right of Iranians if they had insisted, but Iran proposed, to our surprise, to have a share of 11%. This means Islamic Republic is making a sellout because it expects political support, say, for example, in the veto right. This is why it's prepared to give part of Caspian Sea to Russia. But later on, let's turn into the entity, which is called the Islamic Republic. In Islamic Republic, by definition of its constitution, there is no country as Iran. So people know that these people do not respect the country of Iran as a country. Iran, for them, according to the constitution, is a basis to reap and collect the resources and export the revolution worldwide. So the boundaries do not mean anything to them. This is why what is being produced in Iran, the national product, is being distributed in many other countries with no return. So parts of Iraq was running, parts of Afghanistan, parts of Yemen, parts of Lebanon, groups within these countries. These were all extended arms of the Islamic Republic. So Iranian product was distributed among all this. So the question of nation, for the people who rule in Iran, Iranian nation does not exist. What exists is Islamic community. An Islamic community means about 200, 300 million Shiites, and if they expand it, it encompasses all the Islamic world. Whoever is friendly with them. So limited to about 100, 150 million people. This is one. So you just go through the constitution, then you see that as to sovereignty, I can only name the articles without getting into detail. Article number 2, number 5, 56, 57, 71, 76, 77, 78, 91, 93, 26, 27. All of these say that Iran and Iranian nation does not exist. And all the powers are concentrated in the hand of one, which is not a representative Iranian nation. This is why people become suspicious. As to the question of property rights of the people to their own country, well, articles again in the same constitution say that the country does not belong to people, it belongs to God. And who represents God? The leader represents God. So he has a right to do whatever with it. This is why people get suspicious. And you turn to human rights question. Again, the Constitution of Islamic Republic does not recognize that humans have a right. Article 12, Article 20, 21, 24, and indeed, you look at the Human Rights Charter, 30 articles, find only one article which is being respected by Islamic Republic, which is being respected. Not only one out of 30. This is why people are suspicious. Otherwise, if the suspicions did not exist, and if these legal backgrounds did not exist, people wouldn't be that suspicious. And finally, this insistence that we're not going to reveal, to publish the text, is another question which invigorates the suspicion. People have a right to know. What contract are you getting into? This is not, of course, to mention, it's not a contract. It is a mutual memorandum of understanding so far, which has got to be completed by about hundreds of agreements. Though this does not have the technicality of a contract. It is in loose terms and sometimes vague terms, which allows almost any Iranian resource to the Chinese. Finally, to mention that the question of 400 million, there's not the question of 400 million investment Chinese in the document given out as a draft by the foreign minister of Iran in both Persian and English version. There's not. And as to that, I can express myself with more certainty, because question of investment is a serious matter, and Chinese are one of the very meticulous investors in the world. They do not bring and invest their money, good money, in a country which has a very, very low reliability, and its security risk is very high, commercial risk is very high, legal risks are very high. So in these countries, no investor would do that kind of investment. Whatever they do, it depends on what sort of contracts they form afterwards. They will say, we make this amount of investment as a loan to which you're committed to pay the interest and pay back. And the collateral for it is, for example, your oil, gas, petrochemicals, or infrastructure that we have built. In case you do not, then we will confiscate these areas. This is what's going to happen. But finally, my understanding is Iran follows one urgent need, and that is the need to control the internet. This ranks number one in Iranian priority. This is why they're begging China to come and block Google, block internet, install their own search engines, their own operative systems, their own computer systems, and control the virtual space. This is what the leaders are so worried about, the virtual space. So the main priority in this kind of commitment they're getting into is control the internet space. And they know that China has, so far, it has the technology to do that. So this is why they're inviting them to come and do it. And of course, it follows all the telecommunication, communication, television stations, broadcastings, radios, and any communication is going to come under Chinese control. This is what the leader in Iran wants to get. So it is a quid pro quo. You give us this security, Iran says. We will give you, and of course, support in international instances like the United Nations Security Council. And we will give you our resources, and you can enjoy, of course, use this as a link in your very ambitious project of One Belt, One Road.
Yes, the Chinese government has been pushing Huawei as the technology developer for the 5G generation of the cell phone communication technology, and it has basically provided that, offered that technology to basically every country in the world. During Trump administration, the United States took a very strong position with respect to Huawei, penetration of Huawei in United States and offering the 5G technology. And then they convinced the Europeans to do the same, to resist against the opening up of their market to Huawei and the Chinese 5G technology. So that pushback by the United States and Europeans later was, partially successful. Huawei was prevented from coming to the United States, and to some European countries reversed their contracts with Huawei. And Huawei and the Chinese, apparently, the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party, CCP, who, according to different accounts, they have subsidized Huawei's 5G technology by a whopping $50 billion cash from the government treasury to Huawei for the development of the 5G. The question becomes, Dr. Mansour, why should a subsidized company compete freely in European countries and in the liberal democracies and in open market-based economies? And what is the interest of Chinese government to give such massive subsidy to a particular company, Huawei? And in that kind of information is what really strengthens people's suspicion as to the intentions of Huawei in implanting, eavesdropping technology for listening to people's communications and to some of the sensitive information from the governments, and that was basically the foundation for the U.S. opposition for Huawei presence in the U.S. Cell phone industry. What is your opinion about Huawei and its ties with the Chinese Communist Party and their combination of their intention in offering this technology, apparently at a very affordable price to basically anybody who wants it?
Yes. The one important aspect of the question is about the dumping and subsidies. According to the World Trade Organization, to which China was acceded through United States help, it is forbidden. It is forbidden to dump, and it is forbidden to subsidize in order to make something which is not competable, to make it advantageous competable. This rule of the game has been violated over and over again, by not only by China, by many countries, but China is one of the prime violators of this rule. This is from the trade point of view, but security issues are now dominating. They're more important. The question of control of the world through information, it has led China to abuse all the possibilities that, say, Europe has been outsourcing its manufacturing of computers to China. So you get Dell computer, which is manufactured in China. But the engineers with whom I've been talking, they say once they get the computer, which is a free and empty computer, they find great many softwares installed in it, which are espionage softwares. One of the engineers had telling me just last week that I worked about 1 week on my computer in order to clean it from the softwares installed by Chinese into it. While the computer, he said, I have bought is a Dell computer. So this is going to be a very important security question. And with the modern technology, 5G technology, it is being connected almost every aspect of your information, even your bank accounts are going to be connected to it. So this is something which is going to provide a position of strength for China. But for the countries who don't have the control, they're going to end up with the losers. So all their information, you just read this the 18-page document issued by Iranian Foreign Ministry. The insistence on Chinese navigators in Iran. It means any citizen moving wherever, Chinese will be in control. So this navigation, combined with all other like operative systems, like tablets, like computers, like mobile phones, and then you have the G5 advanced technology. This means that any information related to the lives, businesses, and activities of citizens will be controlled by China, and it's a very serious matter. So I think New World, which is a general problem, the jurisdiction is lagging behind the pace of technology. This means technology advancing far more quickly that jurisdiction cannot cope with it. And this puts the risk of the nations at a very high stake.
Another strategic investment that's mentioned in the treaty is the development of Josk port, located just outside the Strait of Hormuz.
That's right.
This seems to have been designed to help infrastructure development, since it will allow Iran to bypass the Strait of Hormuz for its energy export. Also, developing Josk and equipping it with modern port equipments like ship-to-shore container cranes, harbor management, maritime cranes, could also help further expand the Islamic Republic's capability to threaten access to the Strait of Hormuz. Do you think China is deliberately empowering Islamic Republic to be able to gain the means and economic power of blocking Strait of Hormuz at some point in future?
Well, we may speculate, but the main intention of Iran through developing Josk was just to avoid the sanctions and to avoid the Hormuz Strait and send its oil through Josk, which is outside of the strait. But of course, China's intention is to have some strategic points, strategic ports in, well, all over the world. Now already about 32, 34 important ports are in control of this one way, one route in the world. So Josk is one of those that China would like to have. Of course, it increases the political weight of China, military weight of China, and of course its position vis-a-vis its rivals like United States and Europe in negotiating. And this is one of the aspects. Apart from the increase or optimization of value chain in their economies, which is from the point of view of China quite a legitimate thing to do, even if it is not legitimate from the point of view of, say, Iran, because once you optimize your value chain, it does not necessarily optimize it for Iran, it optimizes for China. But China is using all these as counterweights for the pressures of the West in its rivalry and negotiations. So if China is getting the Venezuelan oil and bringing it to Malaysia, mixing it with the items, and then getting it to China, this means that, well, it knows that, US and the world knows it, yet it becomes one of the counterweights with which they can negotiate. Say, all right, we don't do this, we don't do this. So in all this, small countries which are just small chips in this negotiation, and they don't have any determining power in it. There's separate links. So important of Iran, even if it's an important area, what importance of it is just the importance of a link in the chain, for which China has alternatives, of course, but it chooses one route which is optimal, and in this case it is Iran. But for Iran, it is not a choice. For China, it is a choice. So they can always negotiate and use it as a chips in their negotiations. This is what China is trying to do. And this is why all the important ports there, Jask, and later on you have Qeshm, and other ports in Iran, they're going to be kind of under the control of China once they're present in Persian Gulf. And Persian Gulf is an international area. Of course, it's going to be used and abused.
If you basically want to speculate on the futures of this treaty, of this agreement between Islamic Republic of Iran and China, you really base your analysis on a few facts. These facts are the past record of China and their investment in other countries, and basically the way that the relationship exists between the government of China, between the political arm of the country and the economic part and the corporations in Chinese companies. On that basis, you're saying that there is a good likelihood that China will empower Iranian government to strengthen its hands, its strong arms against the Iranian people, and basically oppose any liberation movement, any democratic movements for establishing democracy in Iran. And you're saying that this is exactly why this treaty is against the national interest of Iran, and you're referring to what China did in terms of taking over of some of the ports and cities in countries that couldn't afford to pay China back, because all their so-called economic plans and economic treaties with other governments is really in the basis of loans rather than grants. And if these countries cannot afford to pay back, China basically takes over the control of those ports and basically threatens the national sovereignty of those countries. On this account, a part of this treaty involves actually positioning 5,000 Chinese soldiers in Iran to protect China's investment in Iran. So if, first of all, I mean, doesn't this threaten and jeopardize and at least disrespect the national sovereignty of Iran? And if these investments are not really true investments and grants, and they are in the form of loans, why do they need military protection? And isn't this an unprecedented measure for an economic treaty between two governments?
Well, to begin with, this program, comprehensive program, which has been called, is not a treaty. So the juridical status of this document is not defined yet. It is going to be followed by agreements and agreements and agreements. So treaty is nationally binding. This is not binding. This is just a piece of paper so far. But it mentions in the text that it is agreed by the top leaders of the countries. It means Mr. Khamenei and Mr. Xi Jinping. This makes it strong. Second, the question of 5,000 security agents of China. This is denied by Iran officially. They have denied it. It is published by petroleum economists. And of course, they may have their own good sources. But this may be one of the reasons why Iranian side is not prepared, the Chinese either. They're not prepared to publish it. Certainly, there are things which are not going to be palatable for Iranian people. This is why they don't want to publish it. But the question of investment, let me repeat myself. I think Iran must, as a country, have good economic, political, diplomatic relations with all the nations of the world, including China and Russia. But on a context of options, so you have American option, Canadian option, European option, Japanese option, Australian, New Zealand, any other country which has some comparative advantage, they're open to you, and then you make a choice of an agreement with China. That is fine. Under these circumstances, it is not fine, and it is, I think, dangerous. Apart from it, one point. Iran, to me, is at a crossroads. It has got to make one strategic choice. Do we choose the road of freedom, or do we choose the road of slavery? This is an important choice, which goes beyond the choice of investment projects. To allow China's Communist Party to take control of your information system in the country, it is dangerous. Even if you made this to any other democratic country, but democratic countries do not have this sort of claims. The monopoly of information in a communist country. You look at this very simple story of the COVID-19. If China were a democratic country, the world would not find itself in such a position. Not that I suspect Chinese to have invented the virus, no. But if they had only dissipated the information from the very beginning to the world, it would have been controlled. The reason they don't do it, because information is controlled by a body which is not democratic. So Iran has a strategic choice to choose now to put all your efforts in making Yuan a prevalent money in the world. Again, as an economist, I have no objection, because it's something which has been proposed several times by Bretton Woods authorities, that come and share this burden and share this duties of central banking of the world. It has been proposed to Europe, to Japan, but it was both disadvantages and advantages to these countries, so they have not been able to shoulder this responsibility. Now, China wants to come in and make its own money prevalent in certain areas, well and good. They may enter and try, but that Iran decides to get into that civilization zone of Yuan, it means cut from the dollar-euro zone, which is the zone of democracies. This is dangerous. This becomes a strategic choice. It is not the choice of economic growth path. It is a choice of life. Do we choose to live as free men, or do we choose to live under the yoke and control of either Islamist fanatics or a communist party?
And that brings me to the last question of this possibility, this really ominous possibility that you just raised, the possibility of Iran basically falling behind a new Iron Curtain that seems to be descending at least in the relationship between United States and China. This economic decoupling that we talked about earlier will ultimately result into a military conflict between the Western world, and specifically the United States and China. And those countries that have very close economic ties with China could fall under the wrong side, which is basically the side of China, and that could create a situation like Warsaw Pact. All the countries that were members of the Warsaw Pact and close allies of Soviet Union during the Cold War, they basically were prevented from economic development, and they resulted into becoming second-hand citizens of European Union even after the downfall of Soviet Union and integration of the former Eastern European countries in Europe. These countries still have a long way to go in terms of development in comparison to their Western counterparts. And you're saying that there is such a threat really existing for countries who are getting too tied in with the Chinese economies, like the Islamic Republic is trying to do, and like Venezuela and North Korea and all the close ideological allies and the economic allies of China. They run the risk of falling on the wrong side of the economic divide if it comes down to a conflict between the United States and China, which seems to be almost imminent because the United States is forming this military treaty, a new military treaty in the Southeast Asia with their partners in that part of the world, including India, Japan, and Australia. And the so-called Quad Treaty. If this Quad Treaty replaces NATO in the new Cold War and managing the conflict between US interests and the Chinese interests, especially regarding what's happening in the South China Sea and the US opposition in Chinese manufacturing of these artificial islands and militarizing them and all of that, if all of these things that are happening between China and the United States and the new reality on the ground that seems to point to the direction of a new military pact between US and its allies in the Southeast Asia and South China Sea specifically, you're saying that it runs the risk of Iran forever getting stuck in that economic bloc, which would be against the national interests and against the intention of Iranian people to live in a free and open society with the opportunity to have equal access to all their partners based on the national interest rather than based on the ideology of the government. Is that a close assessment of your position?
Yes, almost yes. You remember we talked about development and growth. And I said, with no doubt, China has achieved a great rate of growth. Then you're wondering if they have approached development. And I said, some steps, yes, but would they lead to really development? No. Because the aim of development is to produce a free man, transcendental man, not obedient slaves. That's what China is trying to do. So the question for Iran becomes whether we are stepping on a road of serfdom, of slavery, or we are progressing towards the Iranians' ideal of freedom, for which they've made 2-3 revolutions so far. Freedom in a free society, in an open society. So the choice for Iran now is choice between an open society and controlled cage. That is the main thing. Otherwise, as to valuation of projects, I'm very open, and I expect and I believe that Iran as a nation has got to make the best choice among the existing options, and these existing options must encompass the whole world. But now the world in a stage of block building after the changes in 20-25 years. New blocks are emerging. And Iranian leaders now, the present leaders of Iran, they're taking sides. Look at their friends. They're friendly with North Korea, with Venezuela, with Cuba, with Russia, with China. So the question to any thinking human being is, how is that an Islamic country can become so close to officially atheist leaders in the world? For me, it's not a question, but for them must be a problem. Atheists and non-atheists, these are private matters. You may choose to be atheist, and I'm going to respect you as a human being. But for an Islamic country to have your best and only friends among the world's atheist countries in which the word of God is a crime, and Muslims in Uyghur in China are being suppressed, and they have been now incarcerated by millions, or Chechen Muslims. How is that? These are your best friends in the world. I believe in friendship with all the nations of the world, including China and Russia. But do I want to live in China? No, I want to live as a free man, to be able to write whatever I think is right, to read whatever I fancy to read. I don't want to get diktats from the people to say, do this and don't do that. Now the choice we are is at the crossroad of taking one of these, road A, road B. Road A, which is so open now, Chinese, and road B is no, our traditional way of democracies and freedom-loving people. So it is a very precarious decision, and in which I expect the people of Iran would make the final decision, and they'll make the right choice. Otherwise, this road is going to lead us down to the very bottom of the valley, which is the road of slavery, as Hayek would have put it.
On that note, I thank you very much for participating in this episode of our series of conversations about economic development and economic growth, for your enlightening and sobering analysis of what's in the future in the light of China's aspiration to become a superpower, and picking friends and allies in the world. And in the context of this treaty with the Islamic Republic, they seem to have chosen to have one of those allies as the Islamic Republic. And we are going to talk more about this issue and on our main theme of this series, economic development and economic growth. And once again, I thank you very much for your participation and for your enlightenment. And we will say goodbye to our viewers until next week. Thank you very much, Professor Mansour.
Thank you very much indeed.